Everyone, and welcome to week 14. This will be our final lecture of the class. Next week is simply focused on your community assessment, so there will be no lecture quiz associated with it. Today we will be discussing charitable accountability and transparency. So when we think about accountability and transparency, both of these are a way for organizations to establish trust. So it's all about opportunities for really show the public, show the community that you are using your funds and you're engaging in activities how you say you're doing it. Think about the last time you donated to a nonprofit. Before you donated, did you do any research on the nonprofit? Did you seek to ensure that, you read the mission statement? More than likely, you know what the organization says it does. But did you take any further steps to make sure that they're using their funds how you want them to, that they're actually doing what they say they're doing? Because it's easy to put up some, great heart-wrenching pictures to have a nice campaign and tell people that this is what we're trying to solve, this is the problem we're trying to solve. But there's been some problems in nonprofits really utilizing the money the way that they're saying they're utilizing them. So accountability is the idea that we have an obligation to explain our actions to our stakeholders. So we can explain to our donors, to our board of directors, that this is exactly what we're doing. This is how we're spending our money. Transparency is making the information available. So having critical data about the organization, that you're posting it on your website, that you have documents in place that are showing your accountability measures. So accountability is that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and transparency is showing that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And utilizing both of these tools, nonprofits can really build trust in the community. A lot of us can probably think about some sort of nonprofit scandal or loss of public faith. There's been a lot of questions of how, major, the largest nonprofits, some really big one like the Red Cross and Goodwill. People have questioned how much the CEO makes. There's been questions of how the Red Cross utilizes its funds. There was recently, or a few years ago when they were in Haiti rebuilding homes, there were questions about, you brought in so many millions of dollars, but yet you've only built 6 homes. So all of these really undermine the work of nonprofits. I don't want to say that, all nonprofits aren't, utilizing their funds how they're supposed to, but when we have, a situation where one nonprofit isn't doing the best work, it really hurts other nonprofits because it causes the public to lose a lot of faith in nonprofits as a whole. So it's important that we as nonprofit leaders are, taking actions that are helping to build trust within the community, both by being held accountable for our actions and by being transparent about what we're doing. Both of these are really important. So the Better Business Bureau, I've talked about them previously, but essentially they're like a watchdog agency. So they are people who are kind of watching over both for-profit and nonprofit agencies. We've probably, looked up whether a for-profit has the Better Business Bureau accreditation. For for-profit businesses, they're kind of telling you how good of a job are they doing. People can write complaints about different businesses and so forth. For nonprofits, they have what's called the 20 Standards for Charitable Accountability. So what this is, again, just tools that they have to hold charitable groups accountable to the general public. So they have these 20 standards, these 20 ways that they are measuring nonprofit organizations, and they're giving their stamp of approval. They're saying that these charities are meeting X, Y, Z criteria, and that these are nonprofits that we should be donating to. So they have 20 standards for charitable accountability. That is your first lecture question for the day. How many standards for charitable accountability? 20. I guess there's technically 4 or 5 areas. with our regards to governance and oversight, measuring effectiveness, financial spending and transparency, and then fundraising and informational materials. So the two financial pieces kind of go hand in hand. These are outlined in more detail on the Blackboard page. So there's a very short reading. If you're interested in learning more, feel free to go to the Better Business Bureau website and you kind of see how those things are different calculated. So governance and oversight is looking at ensuring that the volunteer board is active, independent, and free of self-dealing. So this is the idea that each nonprofit has a board of directors. Number one, the board of directors are volunteers. So they aren't paid. One of the criteria for accountability in governance is that no more than 10% of voting members receive compensation from the organization. So sometimes there's some conflicts of interest, but these need to be minimized when you're on a board of directors. And number one, I'll just go in order. So number one, the board of directors, there needs to be a board of directors that's providing adequate oversight of the staff. So the executive director is being held accountable and is reporting to the board of directors ultimately. The board of directors, because they're volunteers, they shouldn't have, vested financial interest in the organization. So they're able to really look at the executive director and say, hey, are they working and taking actions like we want them to, and that is in the best interest to fulfill the mission of the organization. That's number one. Number two is that the board of directors needs to have at minimum 5 voting members. So the board of directors are the people who, again, they're taking the actions to direct the overall mission of the organization. They're going to vote on the budget. They're going to vote on electing an executive director. Major decisions they're voting on. So there at least needs to be 5 voting members. Some really large board of directors might have non-voting members. So these might be different community members. They might be staff who attend board of directors meetings. But when it comes to approving the budget, they're not going to be voting. But at least 5 people need to be voting members of the board of directors. They need to have at least 3 face-to-face meetings per year. And no more than 10% of voting members should be receiving compensation from the organization. So your second lecture question for the day is having at least a minimum of 5 voting members. So remember that, 5 voting members, 20 standards, 5 voting members. No more than 10% of voting members can receive compensation. So sometimes you might have someone who's on the board of directors who may be receiving compensation from the organization. It might be that they provided some sort of consulting to the organization. Maybe the person has a financial company who is providing, the 401k plans for the nonprofit. But no more than 1 person on the board or no more than 10% of voting members should be receiving compensation from the organization. So you need to minimize financial conflicts of interest. So financial conflict of interest is any time if there's someone who's on the board of directors who's receiving money. So there really needs to be that minimized. So if there's someone who's on the board of directors who maybe they own a housekeeping company, the board of directors their company probably shouldn't have a housekeeping contract with the nonprofit. That would be considered a conflict of interest because the board of directors member obviously would want them to make decisions that's in the best interest of their company. So they really need to minimize these financial conflicts of interest between anyone on the board of directors and the organization as a whole. So a lot of it has to do with different contracts that the nonprofit might hold with outside organizations. This is especially important with larger nonprofits who have a lot of contracts, with different, maybe they contract out for therapists, maybe they contract out for drivers, if they do transportation services. So it's just important that it's important that the board of directors is independent. So they're able to freely make their decisions without having to take into account their personal or professional decisions. The second area is looking at measuring effectiveness. So we kind of talked about effectiveness last week, but effectiveness is the idea that organizations have defined measurable goals and objectives, that they have a mission, and that they have a way of assessing whether they're carrying out that mission with very specific goals and objectives. And they also need a way to evaluate whether they're kind of maintaining, if they're achieving those goals and objectives. Because if I say that I want to reduce the prevalence of child abuse, if I have no way of actually evaluating, or if I have a way but I choose not to evaluate if I'm actually reducing child abuse as an organization, then I'm not measuring effectiveness. Then I don't really know if my organization is using this money effectively. So it's not only important that we have these measures, these goals in place, the goals and objectives, but we also need someone holding us accountable for these measures. We don't only assess it, but the board of directors is going to assess it at least every 2 years and report on the findings. So someone outside of staff on the organization needs to be looking at these effectiveness measures. A large chunk of the 20 standards for charitable accountability through the Better Business Bureau really have to do with financial spending and transparency of financial information. So spending is kind of looking at how organizations are spending the money entrusted to them. So organizations get their money through a lot of donations, a lot of government grants. So they're kind of looking at ensuring that organizations are spending it in the most efficient way possible. So it's looking at organizations spending it honestly, prudently, and in accordance with how they're saying they're spending it. So the first financial statement is saying that organizations are spending at least 65% of its total expenses on program expenses. So the Better Business Bureau wants to make sure that organizations are putting their money where their mission is. Okay, so if our mission is to provide recreational activities for kids with disabilities, 65% of our expenses should directly be going to providing recreational activities for kids with disabilities. Those are our programs. So what you have to keep in mind is that organizations have a lot of other expenses. Along with simply carrying out the programs, organizations need fundraising. So they have a development director who helps coordinate fundraising. When I create, am carrying out a special event or fundraiser for the nonprofit I work at, that's not considered program time. I'm not directly, planning a swim activity for kids. So if I'm planning our, annual trivia night, then my time is not going towards program. So the amount of my salary that I'm spending, so, if 10% of my time is being put towards planning this trivia night, 10% of my salary would not be considered into program expenses. So program expenses a lot of times does include salary, but it only includes salary if that person is spending their time on programs. So I, as a program manager, send in my timesheet every 2 weeks. Timesheets, everyone has to do timesheets. So on my timesheet, I have to, really say how I spent my time. So I have to say I spent 2 hours doing this, 2 hours doing this, 5 hours doing this. And I say, what amount of this time was to benefit the programs, what amount of the time was to benefit fundraising or general administration. So that at the end of the year, our auditor or our accountant can really say, this is the amount of money that we spent on program expenses versus fundraising expenses versus development expenses. So organizations have to really delineate that. So at least 65% of total expenses need to be on program expenses. Organizations can spend no more than 35% of related contributions on fundraising. So this is saying that related contributions are like donations or grants. So our revenue essentially are related contributions. So we shouldn't be spending more than 35% of the money we bring into the organization to get more money into the organization. So essentially, if you're a nonprofit and you're spending $100,000, you have a development director who makes $100,000. That development director who's in charge of bringing money in, who's in charge of bringing revenue in, should be making at should be bringing in at least $300,000 into the organization. That's typically the rule of thumb, is that you should be, if you have a development director or someone who's in charge of fundraising, you should be bringing in 3 times your salary. That's typically the rule of thumb in nonprofits. So it's similar. So no more than 35% of related contributions on fundraising. So it's the idea that if we have an overall budget of $1 million, we shouldn't be spending more than $300,000 on our special events, because the special events are to raise funds. So we have to make sure that we're not spending all of our money, that the amount we're spending on fundraising is generating more than what we spent, essentially. The third financial spending related standard looks at avoid accumulating funds that could be used for current program activities. So this is the idea that the nonprofit I work at does not have this problem, but the United Way has been kind of dinged for this previously by some watchdog agencies. So the United Way sometimes has a large bank account. They have a lot of money in their savings. The United Way had this problem. Anyone in St. Louis who's familiar with the Children's Service Fund. So the Children's Service Fund is funded through the county. So it's funded through the county government. And it's a pot of money that's then distributed to nonprofits to provide mental health services for kids in St. Louis County. So one of the problems the St. Louis County Children's Service Fund had is that they brought in like $40 million through taxes. And that $40 million was supposed to go to nonprofits for children's mental health. But in the first 2 years, they only distributed $20 million. So their bank account sat on $20 million so they only distributed half of the money that they had collected. So they had accumulated all of these funds and they were not using them towards program activities. So why just have a bank account that's sitting there? This idea of why bury your money when you can actually put it to some good, and the money can kind of help have a multiplying effect to get more money. So the Better Business Bureau looks at kind of the savings account of nonprofits. How much money do you have sitting in your savings account? And they kind of determine if it's too much. I think it's a general idea. They kind of take it on a case by case basis. I don't think they have like a specific number, but you don't want to sit on like $1 million when you can use that to further your mission. It's of course okay to have money sitting in your savings account. Everyone needs a rainy day fund. Nonprofits, balance their budget just like you and I balance our household budget. We have money sitting in savings. If a disaster should occur, if we have problems, we do have money sitting there. And nonprofits need it as well. They could have changes, they could have building repairs come up that they weren't expecting. They could have a loss of a grant they're going to need to pull from their savings account for that. But they don't need to, have millions and millions of dollars sitting there that could be spent otherwise. So that is the third financial standard for the Better Business Bureau. The other financial standards really look at financial transparency. So this is the idea that organizations are really telling the public how they're spending their money. And I've mentioned this before, but as a registered 501c3, so as a registered nonprofit, they have not only does the Better Business Bureau have standards for them, but by law, they have certain things that they have to report. One of the things that they have to report legally is called a 990 form. I think I've talked about this before, but if you work in a nonprofit, I would highly suggest getting a hold of your nonprofit's 990 form. So if you go to GuideStar, it's GUIDESTAR, .org or .com, I don't remember. Look up GuideStar. And GuideStar has a list of all of the registered charities in the country. And they have all of their past 990 forms. So this is a tax form that just shows a breakdown of how they're spending their money. So it shows how much did they spend on program expenses, how much did they spend on fundraising. It's probably about 15 pages long, and they have to report this on a year-by-year basis. Anyone in the organization who makes more than $100,000, they have to show their salary. So again, the nonprofit I work at is super tiny. No one makes more than $100,000, so they don't report that. But some larger organizations, such as like the United Way, they have people who make a fair amount of money. So they would have to report on, if they have, let's say they have 10 people who make over 100,000, they would have to report the 5 highest salaries that are over $100,000. So that just helps, again, the 990 forms are really helpful to really calculate those financial ratios. So all of the financial ratios I just mentioned can be calculated with information from the 990 form. So it just really allows us to hold our nonprofits accountable and double check how they're utilizing the information. So I would highly suggest looking at the 990 form. They're free, open to the public, GuideStar.com or .org, probably .org. So look it up. It looks at expenses, program expenses, fundraising expenses, administrative expenses. That's what it shows on the 990 form. So for going back to the Better Business Bureau standards for charitable accountability, nonprofits need to have annual financial statements available. So they need to be reporting on those 990 forms, and they also need to have the board of directors approve their annual budget. So that's another charitable standard that they need to be having in place. The next kind of group of information regarding charitable standards is looking at fundraising and how they market the nonprofit information. So this is seeking to ensure that the charity is representing accurate and complete information. So it's, any of their informational materials are accurate, truthful, and not misleading. Okay, so an example of this, just gonna say a nonprofit I worked at in St. Louis did this. They said that, we worked with 600, we served 600 in 2016. We served 600 kids in St. Louis. We provided services to 600 kids in St. Louis. I'm making up these numbers, but this is just an example of something that actually did happen. So that number 600 was completely misleading. It was completely inaccurate. We did not serve 600 kids. We actually only served 300 kids. So we only served half as many as we were reporting that we did. And the way that the number was being calculated was that we had 600 kids who were who had enrolled in our program at one point in time. Between 2010 and 2016, 600 kids had come through the system. But in 2016, only 300 kids actually utilized the services. It was a completely misleading number. I pointed this out. It was never changed. It was very unethical to report that number. You have to make sure that you are really outlining it. Now we have more defined ways of stating our information, that in 2016, this is the number of kids who participated in at least one program. So you have to make sure that you're really saying what that information is coming from. And when you're, collecting information from donors, you have to make sure, if you're telling donors, we're collecting money to build another house for Habitat for Humanity. Like, here's Jonah. Here's an example of Jonah. You can, different organizations do this. Like, we're trying to help Jonah's family get a new house. So people are donating money specifically because they want to see Jonah's family get a new house. Let's say Jonah's made up. Let's say Jonah, not only, maybe he is real, but maybe Jonah isn't actually going to get a house. Jonah's on the waiting list, and in spite of the fact that $100,000 was raised, we don't actually give Jonah a new house. We were just trying to get more money, and we're just going to use that $100,000 on the side. That's unethical. We need to be using money the way that we're telling donors we're going to be using it. If we tell them that with your contribution, we're going to be able to add a new therapy program, make sure you add that therapy program. If people are donating money, you need to be using the money the way that you say you do. Additionally, you need to have an annual report available on the website. So this is going to be part of the activity for this week. Pick a charity of your choice. Go and find their annual report. And make sure that they have the information that they should be. So everything in the annual report. So let's find an example. Okay. So I'm going to pull up, let's see, I'm going to go to an organization. I'm going to go to Family Forward. It's an organization I used to work for. So this is a nonprofit in St. Louis. The way each nonprofit, if it's a registered nonprofit, will have their annual report somewhere. It's probably under, like, if there's an about section, this says who we are. That's pretty close to about. Or scroll to the bottom and it might be linked somewhere. So I've scrolled to the bottom and I see publications. I'm going to click on publications because I have a feeling that's probably where the annual report is. Here we go. Download the 2016-2017 annual report. So I'm going to look at this and I'm going to see what all is included in their annual report. So there's specific information that they need to include based on the Better Business Bureau. So that includes the organization's mission statement, their program service accomplishments. Here we see that, defining the need, making an impact. So we helped 9,392 family members last year. So that's their impact, is how many people did we serve. Here's our very specific services, 319 in education and training services. Okay, so these are very specific numbers of the kids that we served. So we can see this. What they also need to include is their financial information. So there needs to be very specific financial information. The 990 form is separate from the annual report. It's not typically on the website. You have to dig a little for it. The annual report, the 990 form has a lot more detailed information. The annual report is going to have the basic information. So you can see here on the annual report. So for just a background, Family Forward, it used to be two separate organizations. They just merged. So that's why you see Family Resource Center and Children's Home Society. So you can see their revenue, the amount of money that they brought in through different ways. And you can also see their expenses. So their program services expenses, their total expenses. So you could easily calculate that one financial standard right here. So you could divide 5.5 by 6.9 to see, if they spend $5.5 million on program services and they spent total expenses of 6.9 million, that's going to put their that one ratio is going to be at about 80%. So if we go back to this number one financial standard, spend at least 65% of total expenses on program expenses. Family Forward spent about 80% of total expenses on programs. So we can see that specifically for Family Resource Center in 2016, they spent $5.5 million on programs. They spent $6.9 million total. So they spent about $1 million on administration, about $500,000 on development. So they check that box. This organization does have the Better Business Bureau check mark. So this is the basic information that needs to be in the annual report, the basic financial information. So just the income, basic expenses, basic assets. You're not going to find the salary of the executive director in the annual report. It is not required. It will not be there. That is your last lecture question for the day. You're not going to find that in the annual report. You're going to find that in the 990 form, but that's a separate form, not on the website. The annual report should be on the website. It is a requirement. Doesn't always mean that it happens, but this is the annual report for Family Forward, and then you see a list of their donors. So this is all pretty standard. So choose an organization, and you're gonna look through their annual report to make sure that they're really showing the information that they should be showing. So that's both the mission statement, impact, and financial information. It's also supposed to have a roster of officers and members of the board of directors. I would have to look a little more closely at Family Forwards to see if that was there, because I didn't see that quickly. The last thing when it comes to fundraising and marketing information is looking at that the charity is really lining out how they benefit from different sale of products and services. So sometimes you're going to see that it's called cause marketing. So this is a way that for-profit businesses kind of collaborate with nonprofits. So it makes them look better. So for example, the nonprofit I worked at, worked with Papa John's. I love Papa John's. Papa John's Pizza, 1 month. So 1 month, they had a campaign. So if you used a specific access code to buy pizza through Papa John's, you got 40% off your order, and then so much of the order went to the nonprofit that I worked at. So this was a very specific way for Papa John's to market our organization, but it makes them look better as well. So it's a win-win. We made $10,000 off of it, which was great for a small nonprofit, and it makes Papa John's look good too. What's important is that when you do something like that Papa John's is really stating what percent is going to the nonprofit. In that situation, 10% of the profits went back to us. And it did go back to us. But sometimes things aren't always as clear. For example, sometimes you might see, I've seen this recently with Big Brothers Big Sisters organization, widely known organization that pairs at-risk youth with a mentor. You might see these like clothing bins around. So these are places where you can donate your clothes, and a portion of the proceeds are going to go to Big Brothers Big Sisters. So it is actually a for-profit business who runs the clothing bins. So you are donating your money to a for-profit business, and then they sometimes the clothes go to like Savers, which is like a discount retail store. It's kind of like a Goodwill secondhand store. Sometimes the clothes are stripped down to threads and then sold, so they somehow make money off of it. And then a portion goes back to Big Brothers Big Sisters. I have found that to be extremely misleading. I think some people, when they see Big Brothers Big Sisters on there, think that the clothes are being donated to Big Brothers Big Sisters, or somehow the money's going back to Big Brothers Big Sisters. I had a friend who worked at Big Brothers Big Sisters who told me that a very tiny portion of the money went back to them. It was not clearly written on the clothing bin. I'm sure somewhere online you can find it, but it's really buried. And that's not positive. That's not good marketing, because when people are donating, they need to know where their money's going. They need to know that if I'm donating my clothes to you, that it's going where I think it's going. So that's an example of probably some bad marketing. I'm sure somewhere there's a small asterisk, very, very small, that shows that information, but it needs to be more widely known. When organizations are receiving, money from a good or services in conjunction with a for-profit business, it needs to be publicized. Okay, so for this week, again, last week of activities, wow, this semester has flown by. So your last weekly activity will be due on May 3rd, which is next Thursday. You will have a lecture quiz due. I also want I have a TED Talk that I would like you to watch. It's 15 minutes. I think it's really interesting. Dan Pallotta, it's called The Way We Think About Charity is Dead Wrong. So I think it just offers a really nice perspective on how charities spend their money. And they tend to be, maybe he suggests that charities are a little overly scrutinized, and that we should, not that we shouldn't hold them to the same standards, but that we should kind of let charities, if we let charities run more effectively, we would be able to have a greater social impact. Your weekly activity for the week is looking at charitable accountability. So what I want you to do is select a nonprofit, look on their website. Is the 2016 or 2017 annual report available on the website? So since we're not quite halfway through 2018, the 2017 annual report might not be finished yet, because you have to, it requires accounting of the 2017 taxes. So they are probably just wrapping those up. So the 2016 might be the most recent available on the website, which is fine. So look and see what's most recent on the website. Does it contain the necessary information, the information that we discussed? And I have it listed on Blackboard as well. I would also like you to attach a copy of or a link to the annual report. So you can link in your submission a copy or the physical link. So go through and write a short paragraph. Is everything there that it's supposed to? Again, let's look at another example. We can find these online. Family Forwards was at the bottom on their publications. That's one where that you're going to find it. Let me look at some other nonprofits. So Keen, another nonprofit I work with. So if you go to their About section, so go to About, a lot of them it's going to be About. Under the About section, go to their annual report. And there you're going to find it right there, 2016 annual report. Let's see, let's go to another nonprofit. So I just want to make sure people are able to find these. So LifeBridge Partnership is another organization I work with in St. Louis, or I'm familiar with. This website is not currently pulling up. Okay, never mind. Bad example. I'm just trying to show you guys where to find them. So you can go to different websites. Go to the charity website of your choice, find their, okay, so let's think about St. Patrick's Center. I know one of you works there and you'll do the St. Patrick's Center, which is perfectly fine. So I just want to make sure that people are able to know. So if we go to St. Patrick's Center, we can go to their website. And then if you go to the About section, again, it's under the About. Let's scroll down. There we see our mission statement, and right there, front and center, is the annual report. These are not too difficult to find, and this is from fiscal year 2017. So there you go. So these are just a few examples. Feel free to use any of those. Find the annual report. What year is it from? Does it contain the necessary information? And I want to see a copy of it. So that's what's due on May 3rd. Most importantly, what is coming up? So your final major activity or assignment for the semester, last one, is going to be due on May 10th. So this is looking at a nonprofit assessment. It's a presentation. So you're going to need to interview at least one staff member at a social service organization of your choice, and you need to obtain relevant agency documents. I am going to ask that the name of the staff member and at least their email is provided in the report. I more than likely will not actually contact them, but just in case it seems like you are pulling information from the website rather than actually having talked to someone, I do want to be able to follow up with them should I need to. I don't anticipate doing that for most of you, but I just want to make sure that I have that option on the reserve. I am choosing to use that. So this needs to be submitted to me some way, shape, or form between May 3rd and May 10th. Absolutely, May 10th is the hard deadline. The goal of it is to go through different things that we talked about all semester on assessing an organization. Pick a social service organization of your choice. It needs to be someone that you are familiar with. Probably over half of you work at a nonprofit. I would assume that you'll use the nonprofit that you work with. That is absolutely no problem. Feel free to use the nonprofit you work at. If you do not, I said this last week, if you do not work at a nonprofit, you don't have access to a nonprofit, you don't currently volunteer or do an internship at a nonprofit, that is fine. Please contact me at least a week in advance. So that is coming up. So you would need to contact me by May 3rd to let me know. And I will put you in touch with a nonprofit. I have connections throughout St. Louis, and I'm happy to get you in touch with people who would talk to you and answer these questions. So I just need to know who needs help getting a connection to a nonprofit, I'm happy to do that. But what you're going to do is you're going to be putting together about a 15-minute presentation. I want PowerPoint slides. You can make this via Tegrity, Fuse, other video maker. If you want to do this in person, I'm happy to schedule something in person for people who are on campus. You would just need to schedule me to set up a time. You need to email me to schedule a time. I can do this over the phone. I'm probably repeating a lot of things from last week, so that's fine. To make a video integrity, what you're gonna do, so if you're in Blackboard, and my screen probably looks slightly different than yours as an instructor, if you click on the left-hand side, you're gonna click Tegrity Classes. So I'm gonna click that, and what's gonna pop up should be a list of your classes. So probably your course list is gonna pop up. So you're going to go down and you're going to find social work practice with communities. These are all of I've made a lot of recordings for this class. And you should have right here this little button that says start a recording. You might have to download something like Java. That shouldn't take too long. But essentially I'm not gonna click the button because I'm in the middle of a recording, but once you start a recording, you click the OK button. What it will do is it will just start recording. So it will, if you have a built-in microphone and a built-in video, you can have the option of having you as part of the video or just sharing your screen. But what it does is it takes a recording of your screen. You can see my screen just like this, and I can talk, so it has both the audio and the screenshot. So you can pull up your nice PowerPoint, just talk me through the slides. This is supposed to be pretty informal. Again, last semester, this was a paper. We've written a lot this semester, so I'm trying to make this less paper heavy. So I'm turning this into a presentation to make it easier on you, not to make it more difficult. I do not want technology to be a problem. I assume everyone knows at least how to make a PowerPoint presentation. If you are not on campus, if you're in Toledo, you can call me and we can do this over the phone, and you can just email me your presentation. But this shouldn't be, hopefully, something that is difficult. I don't want the technology component to be a challenge, because I'm trying to make this easier, not harder. So it should be around 15 minutes with a PowerPoint presentation. Here's the list of things that you should be capturing in your presentation. I mean, you can make like a few slides per section. So what type of organization, what's the mission, the goals, org structure, funding sources, evaluation mechanisms, how do they evaluate their programs and staff, etc. And I kind of went through these specifically. Please email me with any questions. I'm hoping that this outline is fairly straightforward, but I don't know. Since this is the first time I've done it as a presentation, I need your feedback to let me know what additional information you need. Yeah, and again, if you need help connecting with an organization, please contact me and I'm happy to make that happen. But that needs to be submitted on Blackboard by May 10th. I would appreciate it. Again, email me with questions. I'm still working on grading your community assessment papers. Please be patient with me. They're coming along. I have more students in this class this semester than I did in the previous semester, so it's just taking me longer to get things graded. I apologize. But I want to make sure I'm providing ample feedback to each student. So patience, please. Thank you all, and it's been a joy having you all in class this semester. Thanks.